before humans existed, Earth had already gone through billions of years of formation and transformation. Violent collisions, erupting volcanoes, meteor showers, and cycles of ice ages all shaped the blue planet we now call home. Amidst this chaos, life gradually formed, from the simplest oceanic cells to fish, amphibians, reptiles, and eventually the first primates. Among them, a unique branch began to stand out. They left the trees, walked on 2 feet, and began to explore the world with curious eyes. Around 2.4 million years ago, in the arid and sun-scorched lands of East Africa, the first humans appeared. We call them Homo habilis, which means handyman. Short in stature, small-skulled, with arms longer than legs, their real difference lay in their brains. Though still primitive, it was enough for them to realize a sharp stone could become a weapon, a sturdy branch a digging tool, and an animal bone a means of survival. This was the moment humans began crafting tools. Not with machines, but with instinct and observation. They picked up hard stones, smashed them to create sharp edges, for cutting meat, splitting bones, cracking nutshells, or even self-defense. This was humanity's first tool revolution, crude, but vital. It paved the way for monumental changes to come. Following habilis came Homo erectus, upright man. Appearing around 1.9 million years ago, they had larger bodies, greater mobility, and most importantly, they were the first humans to leave Africa and explore the wider world. They had no maps, no compass, only strong legs and a fierce will to survive. They crossed deserts, forests, rivers, and mountains, reaching Asia and Europe. Along the way, they faced endless dangers, predators stalking them at night, harsh climates, scarce food. Yet, through resilience and adaptability, they spread across continents, leaving behind stone tools and evidence of fire, proof that they were the first to harness this game-changing element. Fire was a turning point. Though no one knows exactly how humans first encountered fire, archaeological evidence suggests Homo erectus was the first to use and maintain it. Perhaps they collected it after a lightning strike or forest fire. Eventually, they learned to make fire by striking flint stones or rubbing dry wood rapidly. This changed everything. Fire allowed humans to cook food, making it more digestible, safer, and more nutritious. This improved health, reduced disease, and even influenced biological evolution. Softer food meant smaller jaws and more brain space. Beyond survival, fire gave light, warmth, and protection from wild beasts. It made the night less terrifying and allowed for community, people gathering around the fire, telling stories, teaching children, sharing ideas. Fire became a symbol, not just of survival, but of social and mental advancement. Meanwhile, other human species coexisted. Homo neanderthalensis, or Neanderthals, lived in Europe and West Asia. Stocky and intelligent, they used sophisticated tools, may have spoken primitive languages, and buried their dead. In Asia, mysterious Denisovans interbred with early humans. In Indonesia, Homo floresiensis, tiny in stature, lived in isolation until as recently as 50,000 years ago. Then, around 300,000 years ago in Africa, a remarkable species emerged, Homo sapiens, modern humans. Not the strongest or tallest, but with a brain wired for language, cooperation, and imagination. They learned faster, formed bigger communities, and soon became the only surviving human species. Still, life was brutally hard. People lived in caves or under trees, waking at sunrise to hunt and forage. Men tracked prey, deer, rabbits, birds, using stone spears. Women and children gathered roots, berries, and medicinal plants. A broken bone could mean death. Predators roamed freely. Storms, frost, and famine were constant threats. But even in hardship, humans discovered solidarity. They shared food, cared for the sick, protected the young. Slowly, language emerged, first gestures and calls, then simple words. They began painting on cave walls, animals, hunts, symbols, creating art to communicate, remember, and perhaps even dream. These cave paintings, still visible today, reveal not only survival, but spirit. In the end, humanity's journey from East Africa to the farthest corners of the world wasn't driven by strength, but by intelligence, resilience, and imagination. Those early humans, with nothing but their hands, stones, and sparks of thought, laid the foundation of civilization. From caves to rockets, from stones to smartphones, it all began with a small, upright creature who dared to learn, adapt, and dream. After millions of years of evolution and migration, our ancestors, those who lived in the Paleolithic age, gradually adapted to every kind of climate and terrain. From the grasslands of Africa, the tropical rainforests of Southeast Asia, to the icy valleys of Europe, early humans found ways to build shelter, even if it was temporary, just enough to survive another day. Their dwellings varied depending on the environment. In rocky or mountainous areas, they lived in caves, deep, dry, and safe from predators. Where there were no caves, they built huts using animal skins, branches, and logs. Tribes near rivers built tents along the water for easy access to fish and drinking water. These primitive homes were often clustered together, centered around a fire, the heart of community life, where people cooked, sewed, sharpened tools, told stories, and stayed warm. Life followed the rhythm of nature. There were no clocks, no calendars, only sunrise and sunset. When the sun rose, the entire tribe woke. No one slept, and every moment could mean the difference between survival and death. Men typically took on hunting duties. They would set off in small groups, armed with spears, axes, and ropes, venturing deep into the forest or high into the hills. Not every hunt was successful. Many days ended empty-handed, sometimes with injuries from wild animals or accidents in the wilderness. But when successful, meat was a prized reward for the whole tribe. Meanwhile, women and children played equally vital roles. They gathered fruit, roots, mushrooms, and honey. They collected firewood, crushed stones to shape tools, or prepared hides for clothing. Children learned early which plants were safe, how to avoid snakes, how to start a fire, and how to follow animal tracks. Knowledge was passed down not through books, but through stories, told around the fire each night. These fireside stories were the first schools of humanity. Without writing or formal education, knowledge was transferred through narrative, about which berries to avoid, how to trap animals, or the tale of a hunter who outran a lion. Elders were the teachers, and children were the eager listeners. Their wide eyes, their silent awe, this is where imagination began. But life was far from safe. A predator could strike at any moment. A rainy season could flood the camp. A colder winter could mean death without enough firewood and fur. Yet humans were resilient. They learned to preserve food by smoking it. They dug shelters to escape storms. And most importantly, they moved. Paleolithic life was nomadic. They never stayed in one place too long. They followed the seasons, the rivers, and the migration of animals. Society was simple, yet effective. Most tribes were small, 10 to 30 people. There were no kings, no laws, but there was still leadership. Usually the elder or the most experienced hunter guided the group, assigned tasks, and resolved disputes. Everyone had a role. No one was left behind. The weak were helped, the children were taught, and the elders were respected. This spirit of community was the foundation of later civilizations. As for clothing, humans were never truly naked. They used animal skins to make cloaks, skirts, and simple shoes. In colder climates, they wrapped themselves in thick fur. In warmer regions, they wove grasses into belts or wore minimal coverings. Hair was tied back using fish bones or tendons. Some even painted their bodies, wore bone jewelry, or dyed their skin with red clay, not just for decoration, but to scare predators or express identity. Meals were simple. If the hunt was successful, there was meat. If not, roots, nuts, berries, and insects filled the menu. There were no pots or pans. They roasted meat over open fire or buried it in hot coals. Water was drawn from streams, collected from rain, or scooped with large leaves. No bowls or plates, just hands, shells, or carved bones. Yet every meal was communal. People sat in circles, shared evenly, and no one was left hungry. Night was the most dangerous time. When the sun went down, darkness brought fear. Predators prowled. The cold crept in. So humans stayed close to the fire. One person always kept watch, feeding the flames. Some tribes blocked cave entrances with stones or raised food above the ground to keep animals away. Nighttime sounds were a symphony, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, distant howls. But the fire gave comfort. Its glow meant safety. Despite harsh conditions, Paleolithic people had rich spiritual lives. Across caves from Europe to Australia, we find symbolic cave art, drawings of animals, handprints, abstract designs. These weren't random, they were rituals, beliefs, or records. Some graves contained tools, colored stones, or food, suggesting a belief in an afterlife. From fire making to drawing, from gestures to storytelling, from knotting ropes to skinning animals, all these are proof of an extraordinary intelligence. Early humans weren't just surviving, they were feeling, remembering, dreaming. When we look back, we often see the Stone Age as primitive. But in truth, it was the foundation. It was when humans learned to live, love, and wonder even with bare hands and no written words. Because from those tiny tents in the forest, from those flickering fires in the caves, the light of civilization began to shine. In the Paleolithic age, humans had no concept of farming or domestication. Food didn't come easily, they had to go out and find it, fight for it, sometimes die for it. While gathering sustained life, hunting was often the difference between mere survival and true strength. It was not sport, it was war against nature. Every hunt was a journey. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight slipped through the treetops, men in the tribe would gather their tools, sharpened spears, stone axes, slings, and ropes. They would paint their faces with mud or ash, tie fur belts, and move silently into the wilderness. Sometimes they hunted in teams of 3 to 5. Sometimes alone. No one ever knew whether they'd return with meat or with wounds. Wild animals are not easy prey. A deer runs 3 times faster than a human. A wild boar can break bones with a single charge. A bear? Impossible to beat in a head-on fight. So intelligence was their greatest weapon. Hunters learned to read tracks, distinguish between fresh and old droppings, interpret broken twigs, and even listen to how birds reacted to distant movement. They learned patience, camouflage, teamwork. Their first weapon was the sharpened spear, made from hardwood, its tip hardened by fire or carved stone. Over time, they attached stone blades, bone points, or added barbs for better grip. When prey was found, the group would split, one would distract, others would flank. Sometimes they chased the animal until it collapsed from exhaustion. Sometimes they dug pits, covering them with leaves. In cliff areas, they drove animals toward steep edges. Every tactic was built on strategy, precision, and bravery. On lucky days, they returned with large game, a deer, an elk, even a buffalo. The entire tribe would celebrate. Meat was roasted over the fire. Skins became clothing. Bones were carved into tools. Children gathered around the carcass to learn how to slice, how to preserve fat, how to shape bones. It wasn't just food, it was a life lesson. But on many days, there was nothing. A failed ambush. A missed throw. An injury. Sometimes a hunter would fall into a pit himself. Sometimes someone didn't come back. The forest didn't forgive mistakes. The cost of meat was always high. Still, hunting remained essential. It provided protein crucial for brain and muscle development. But beyond the physical, it built community. The planning, the execution, the sharing, all fostered unity. And from it came stories of near-death escapes, miraculous throws, battles against impossible odds. Whether exaggerated or true, those tales became legends, fueling courage for the next generation. Humans didn't just hunt large animals. They trapped birds, rabbits, lizards, and rodents. They fished using sharpened sticks, stood still in shallow waters, or made nets from plant fibers. Some tribes dug tunnels to flush out animals or set snare traps with bent branches and tension ropes. Ice fishing was done with bone hooks, lines made of sinew, and bait made from insects. Every region had its own methods, adapted to terrain, climate, and species. And hunting wasn't only survival, it was spiritual. Some tribes painted animals on cave walls before the hunt as a prayer. Hunters adorned themselves with feathers, bones, or face paint, believing it helped channel the spirit of the prey. Some rituals mimicked the animal's movements, hoping to gain its strength. Even after a successful kill, many performed ceremonies to honor the creature's soul. That's why cave paintings, tens of thousands of years old, still exist today. They don't depict butchery, they depict reverence, a man mid-throw, a deer leaping, dust flying. They weren't just records. They were memories. Symbols. Offerings to the gods of nature. Today, we often view hunting as violent. But for our ancestors, it was sacred. Every kill meant survival. Every hunt was a contract with nature, one life taken, one life preserved. They never hunted for fun. They hunted because they had to. And they remembered what it cost. Some scholars say hunting made humans more social. It taught strategy, patience, risk-taking. It required cooperation and planning. A successful hunt bonded a tribe tighter than any rule or law. And it gave meaning to death. In every spear thrown, there was fear. But also hope. And pride. So from deep forests to icy plains, from savannas to cliffs, humans hunted not with rage, but with courage. And from each chase, each scar, each fire-roasted feast, they forged the spirit of endurance. They didn't just survive the wild. They learned to master it. And that's how they began their long journey, from prey to predator to the rulers of the natural world. For millions of years, humans feared the night. When the sun disappeared, darkness swallowed the world, cold, silent, and full of danger. Predators awoke. The wind howled through the trees. Eyes glowed in the shadows. Without light, warmth, or shelter, humans were vulnerable. But then, somewhere, sometime, a spark lit dry leaves. And fire was born. It may have come from a lightning strike, a volcanic eruption, or the remnants of a forest fire. At first, humans didn't make fire, they only found it. But once they did, they never wanted to let it go. A burning branch became more precious than a weapon. They guarded embers with care, keeping it alive through rain and travel, wrapping it in bark or carrying hot coals and moss. Fire was no longer just heat, it was life. Eventually, they learned to make it. Flint stones struck together could create sparks. Rubbing dry wood quickly over a groove could ignite dry grass. Not everyone could do it, those who could were revered, like magicians or guardians. In many tribes, a single person kept the fire alive day and night. If it went out, the entire group could freeze or starve. With fire, everything changed. Humans began to cook. Meat was no longer chewed raw. Roots were softened. Parasites were killed. Digestion improved. Energy increased. Cooked food not only made survival easier, it changed our bodies. Jaws became smaller. Stomachs became more efficient. And brains grew. Fire, in its invisible way, reshaped human evolution. But fire was more than food, it was safety. Animals feared it. Darkness retreated from it. Fire created the first circle, a safe zone where people gathered. Around the flames, they talked, ate, planned, and told stories. For the first time, humans could relax at night, knowing the fire was watching. The flickering light painted their faces, warmed their bodies, and connected their souls. Fire created community. It brought people closer. Everyone sat in a circle, no one above or behind. It equalized. Children learned from elders. Hunters shared tales. Wounds were treated. Songs were sung. Laughter echoed through caves. Fire turned shelters into homes. And in those glowing circles, language bloomed. People no longer grunted, they spoke. Descriptions, feelings, warnings, dreams, all flowed through flame-lit words. With time, imagination grew. They began to wonder, where does fire come from? Why does it dance? Is it alive? And thus, myths began. Some tribes believed fire was a gift from the gods. Others thought it was a spirit that needed to be fed and respected. They danced around it. Offered it food. Feared its anger. Beyond ritual, fire led to invention. With heat, they hardened wooden spear tips. They baked clay to form pots. They boiled water. They learned to use ash as paint. Some even discovered that smoke preserved meat. A whole new chapter of experimentation opened. Fire became the first laboratory, and humans, the first scientists. And then came art. In dim caves, they used torches to light the walls. They ground charcoal, mixed it with animal fat, and painted animals, handprints, symbols. The fire's glow brought the art to life. These weren't decorations, they were messages. Stories. Memories. Evidence of thought. The beginning of recorded history. In some graves, ashes were found beside bones. Some people were burned after death, perhaps to send their spirit skyward, or to protect the living. Fire wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. A link between worlds. From that moment forward, fire accompanied humanity everywhere. In every migration, in every storm, in every war, fire stood by our side. It lit our way, warmed our homes, powered our tools, and inspired our minds. It was the first light of civilization. Even now, in our modern cities of electricity and machines, fire remains in our hearts, campfires, candles, hearths. We still gather around it. Still tell stories in its glow. Fire transformed us, not just biologically, but socially, emotionally, and spiritually. It gave us warmth. It gave us safety. It gave us time to think, to share, to create. It gave us the night. And from that small flicker in a dark cave, civilization began to burn brightly. Humans are not just creatures of survival, they are creators of meaning. Even during the Paleolithic age, when people still lived in caves, hunted with stone tools, and gathered wild roots, they were already laying the first foundations of human culture. One of the clearest signs of this is cave art. Across Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia, archaeologists have uncovered walls covered in paintings, some over 40,000 years old. These weren't random doodles. They were bison, mammoths, deer, hunters, handprints, spirals, and abstract symbols. Some stretch across entire cave chambers. Some are drawn deep underground, in places no light ever reached naturally. Why did they paint them? No one knows for sure. Perhaps it was to honor the animals they hunted. Perhaps it was to teach others, or mark an event, or express emotion. But one thing is clear, early humans had a sense of memory, beauty, and symbolism. They wanted to leave a mark, not just on the earth, but on time itself. Alongside art came language. At first, it was simple, grunts, gestures, and shouts. But around the fire, humans began to speak in richer, more structured ways. They named animals, places, people. They gave shape to emotions, described dreams, told stories. Words became more than sounds, they became bridges between minds. Language didn't just help humans survive. It helped them connect. With connection came belief. Why did storms strike? Why did someone die and not return? Why did the stars move across the sky? In the absence of answers, imagination stepped in. Spirits, gods, ancestors, and natural forces became part of a growing inner world. In some Paleolithic graves, archaeologists found bodies buried with tools, ornaments, food, and even colored powders, perhaps as offerings for the next life. Such burials show respect, memory, and the beginnings of spirituality. These were not yet organized religions. There were no temples, priests, or holy books. But there were symbols. A carved stone shaped like an animal. A handprint painted on a wall. A bone marked with lines. These were more than decorations, they were messages to unseen forces, or perhaps to future generations. As brains grew, questions grew, too. Why do we have to move all the time? Why must we always chase animals? And what happens if we plant a seed? Over time, humans noticed patterns. They saw that dropped seeds sometimes sprouted. That where water flowed, plants thrived. Slowly, they began to return to the same spots each year, then to settle. This was the first step toward agriculture. At the same time, they observed that animals, if raised from young, became tame. Dogs stopped attacking. Sheep followed. Pigs stayed. The domestication of animals began. No longer just hunters, humans became herders and farmers. As people settled, they built better homes, not just tents or caves, but huts made from wood, clay, or stone. They dug ditches for water. Stored food in pots. Divided work more clearly, some hunted, others planted, others cooked, or made tools. Society began to organize. Roles became specialized. With specialization came inequality. Some people gathered more. Some led. Some decided. Authority emerged. Not all tribes remained equal. Slowly, leadership, status, and power began to appear. The seeds of government, hierarchy, and even conflict were planted. But this wasn't just about control, it was also about creativity. Settled life gave time for thought. People invented weaving, pottery, jewelry. They made musical instruments. They told longer stories. Children grew up not just surviving, but imagining. Culture flourished. From that first campfire to early villages, humanity moved from instinct to intention. From reacting to shaping. From merely existing to dreaming. They didn't have smartphones. No books. No cities. But they had imagination. Curiosity. Memory. They sang. They painted. They buried. They built. These weren't luxuries, they were signs of something deeper, consciousness. When we look at this long journey, from Homo habilis to Homo sapiens, we don't just see a biological story. We see the birth of civilization. A species that turned stones into tools, fire into family, caves into canvas, and death into ritual. And today, every step we take, every word we speak, every dream we have, carries the echo of those early humans. They were the first to ask why, the first to imagine what if, the first to create meaning in a chaotic world. From stone to star, from root to religion, from hunt to harmony, our story began not in palaces or cities, but in quiet caves, under starry skies, beside a dancing fire.